When 11-year-old Harper found a man buried in the snow clutching a mysterious medallion, she had no idea her small act of kindness would bring 300 former gang members to their knees in respect. This is the incredible true story of how one brave girl saved an entire community. Hit like if this story moved you, subscribe for more inspiring tales, and comment below where you're watching from. The snow fell like a burial shroud over the Colorado mountains, each flake heavier than the last. Harper Lynn pulled her threadbare coat tighter, her 11-year-old lungs working harder in the thin air. The storm had passed an hour ago, leaving behind that peculiar silence that only comes after nature has spent its fury. She knew this trail by heart, every rock, every bend, every place where lost things might surface after the snow settled. Harper had made this walk dozens of times since moving to the community shelter 6 months ago, always hoping to find something worth salvaging: a dropped wallet, hiking gear, anything she could clean up and sell to help keep the shelter running. The pine scent was sharper today, mixed with the metallic tang of fresh snow. Her boots crunched through the white blanket, each step deliberate and careful. The shelter's volunteers had warned everyone to stay inside during the storm. But Harper couldn't afford to wait. The bills wouldn't pay themselves. And Mrs. Chen had that look in her eyes again, the one that meant they were running out of options. Something dark caught her attention. A corner of fabric, maybe. Harper knelt, her knees immediately soaking through her worn jeans. She brushed away the snow with mittened hands, revealing the toe of a sneaker. Her heart stuttered. Sneakers meant a person. A person meant trouble. Or worse. She should run, should get help. But what if there wasn't time? Harper dug faster, her breath coming in visible puffs as she cleared snow away from what was definitely a leg. Then a torso. Then a face. Pale but breathing. Eyes closed, stubble dark against winter-white skin. A man, maybe 40, with calloused hands that spoke of honest work. Those hands were clutched around something small and metallic. Harper worked it free, her fingers so cold they barely responded. A medallion, tarnished and old, with the number 47 etched deep into its surface. Strange markings bordered the numbers, symbols she'd never seen before. The man's eyes fluttered open, gray eyes, confused but not vacant. Kid. His voice was rough like gravel in a cement mixer. Where am I? You were buried, Harper said simply. I found you. She slipped the medallion into her pocket without thinking, focusing instead on the immediate problem. Can you move? We need to get you warm. He sat up slowly, snow falling from his jacket. How long was I out there? Don't know. Maybe all night. Harper stood, offering her small hand. The shelter's not far, Mrs. Chen will know what to do. He accepted her help, rising unsteadily to his feet. He was tall, much taller than Harper had expected, but he leaned on her anyway, letting a child guide him through the snow. She noticed he kept looking over his shoulder, as if expecting someone to follow. What's your name? She asked, as they picked their way down the trail. Declan. He paused, then added, Declan Rowe and yours. Harper Lynn. She glanced up at him. Were you camping? It's dangerous up here alone. Declan was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, something like that. The shelter came into view. A converted lodge with smoke rising from its chimney. Yellow light spilling from frost-edged windows. Home, if you could call it that. Harper had learned not to get too attached to places. But this one was different. Mrs. Chen made sure everyone had enough to eat. Mr. Rodriguez told stories by the fire. The other kids didn't ask too many questions about why she was there as they approached the front door. Harper felt the medallion's weight in her pocket, heavy for something so small. She should give it back to Declan. But something held her hand. An instinct, maybe, or hope. Inside, warmth enveloped them like a hug. The common room buzzed with quiet activity. Volunteers preparing dinner, residents reading or working on puzzles, children doing homework at mismatched tables, normal life continuing despite the storm outside. Mrs. Chen appeared instantly, her maternal radar finely tuned after 30 years of social work. Harper, you shouldn't have been out there, and who... She stopped, taking in Declan's condition. Oh my, let's get you both some hot chocolate and figure out what happened. As Mrs. Chen bustled away to gather supplies, Harper studied Declan's face. He was scanning the room with careful eyes, noting exits, cataloging faces, not the behavior of a helpless victim. Thank you, he said quietly, meeting her gaze, for not leaving me there. Harper nodded, her hand still closed around the medallion. Anyone would have done the same thing, but even as she said it, She knew it wasn't true. Most people would have run for help, or called the police, or done anything except trust a strange man in the mountains. Harper had learned to read people fast. It was a survival skill, and something about Declan Rowe told her he understood what it meant to be lost in the cold. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. Harper pulled her hand from her pocket and held out the medallion. "This is yours." Declan stared at the tarnished metal, his expression shifting through surprise, recognition, and something that might have been fear. When he finally took it back, his hands were shaking, and not from the cold. Harper returned from the local clinic the next morning with antibiotics for Declan and a clean bill of health for herself. The volunteer who'd driven them back dropped her at the shelter's front door and waved goodbye. Already hurrying to her day job in town, the building felt different, wrong. Somehow, Harper pushed through the main entrance and stopped. Two men in expensive winter coats sat at the communal table where she usually did her homework, papers spread before them like they owned the place. Their voices carried that particular blend of authority and condescension that made her skin crawl. "Administrative oversight that should have been caught months ago," one was saying. He had silver hair and a face like a banker's nightmare. "The property taxes alone put this place in violation of county codes." Mrs. Chen stood nearby, wringing her hands. Mr. Rodriguez leaned against the wall, his usual smile replaced by a worried frown. The other residents clustered in small groups, whispering among themselves. Harper approached quietly, the way she'd learned to move in foster homes where being noticed meant trouble. The men didn't look up when she passed their table, treating her like furniture. Their papers had official letterheads and lots of red stamps. "Excuse me," Mrs. Chen said, her voice tight with forced politeness. "This is Harper, one of our residents. Harper, these gentlemen are from the county assessor's office. They're here about some irregularities." The silver-haired man glanced at Harper, the way someone might notice a stray cat, with mild annoyance and complete indifference. "The irregularities are quite serious, I'm afraid. This facility has been operating under outdated permits for nearly 2 years. The fines alone exceed the property value." Harper felt something cold settle in her stomach. "What does that mean?" The second man, younger with nervous energy, shuffled his papers. "It means the shelter will need to close within 30 days, unless the current debt is resolved. We're talking about substantial financial penalties, plus the cost of bringing the building up to current code standards." "How much?" Mr. Rodriguez asked quietly. "Approximately $80,000. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Harper had heard Mrs. Chen and the other volunteers talking late at night about the shelter's financial struggles, but this was different. This was final. She looked around the room, at the mismatched furniture donated by families in town, at the children's artwork taped to the walls, at the people who had become her temporary family, all of it about to disappear because of papers and rules and money they didn't have. The medallion felt warm in her pocket where she'd transferred it that morning. She'd planned to give it back to Declan when he felt better, but something kept stopping her. Now she gripped it like an anchor, the metal edges pressing into her palm through the fabric. "There must be something we can do," Mrs. Chen said. "An appeal process or payment plan or—" "The county is quite firm on these matters," Silverhair interrupted. "However, there may be interested parties willing to purchase the property as is. We could facilitate those negotiations naturally." Harper caught the look that passed between the two men, quick and knowing, like sharks circling wounded prey. This wasn't about county codes or tax irregularities. This was about taking the shelter away from people who couldn't fight back. She slipped away while the adults continued their tense conversation, climbing the stairs to the small room she shared with 2 other girls. Declan was resting in the men's dormitory down the hall, still recovering from his night in the snow. Harper had checked on him earlier and found him staring at the ceiling with those careful gray eyes, clearly thinking hard about something. From her window, she could see one of the county men's cars, a black sedan that looked too expensive for government work. The license plate was obscured by mud, which seemed convenient. Harper pulled out the medallion and studied it in the afternoon light. The 47 was clearly etched, but the symbols around the edge were harder to make out. They looked almost like letters, but not quite. Some kind of code, maybe, or a message, whatever it meant. Declan had been clutching it when she found him buried in the snow. Someone had put him there. She was sure of it now, and whoever it was probably didn't expect a lost little girl to come digging through the aftermath of a storm. Downstairs, she heard Mrs. Chen's voice rising in frustration, followed by the county men's dismissive responses. More papers rustled, chairs scraped across the floor. Harper closed her eyes and made a decision that would change everything. She was going to find out what the medallion meant, and why Declan Rowe had nearly died for it, because whatever was happening to the shelter, whatever scheme was hiding behind those official-looking papers, she had a feeling it was connected to the man she'd pulled from the snow. The building groaned around her as the wind picked up outside, and Harper Lynn, 11 years old, orphaned, and running out of places to call home, prepared to fight back the only way she knew how. By refusing to let go, Harper found Declan in the shelter's small library, a converted storage room lined with donated books and 2 ancient computers. He sat at the corner table, staring at the medallion she'd returned to him the night before. In the afternoon light filtering through the dusty window, she could see the exhaustion in his face, deeper than what a night in the snow would cause. "You're thinking really hard about something," she said. Settling into the chair across from him, Declan looked up, and for a moment she saw something raw in his expression. Regret, maybe, or recognition. "This medallion, where exactly did you find it? In your hand?" "You were holding it when I dug you out." Harper tilted her head. "But you already knew that, didn't you?" A long silence stretched between them. Outside, she could hear the county men loading papers into their car, their voices carrying the satisfied tone of people who'd accomplished exactly what they came to do. "I used to be part of something," Declan said finally. "A long time ago. Not something I'm proud of." His fingers traced the etched numbers. "We called ourselves a brotherhood, but really we were just a bunch of angry kids who grew into angry men. Did some things, hurt some people." Harper waited. Adults usually needed time to work up to the truth. "This number, 47, it means I owe someone, or someone owes me. It's complicated." He looked directly at her. "Your father, the one who used to run this place before. What was his name? James?"
"James McNeil? But he wasn't my real father. He just..." Harper's throat tightened. "He just took care of people who needed taking care of, including me." Declan nodded slowly. "James McNeil? Yeah, I remember now."
"About 8 years ago, he helped some guys I knew, ex-members who were trying to go straight, got them job training, vouched for them with employers who wouldn't normally hire people with our kind of history." He held up the medallion. "This is from one of them, a promise that if James ever needed help, or anyone under his protection, we'd come running." Harper felt something shift in her chest. "But James died 6 months ago, heart attack, and now someone's trying to take his shelter." Declan's voice carried an edge that hadn't been there before. "Those county men, they're not really from the county, are they? How did you know? Real government workers don't wear $1,000 shoes." Declan stood, moving to the window. "Plus, I've seen this kind of scam before. Create false debt, manufacture legal problems, then swoop in with a solution that happens to involve selling the property for pennies on the dollar." Harper joined him at the window. The black sedan was gone, but she could still feel its presence like a shadow over the building. "So what do we do?" "We make a phone call." Declan pulled out an old flip phone. "There's a number etched inside the medallion. Small, easy to miss. I wasn't sure it would still work after all these years, but..." He opened the medallion with practiced fingers, revealing tiny numbers engraved along the inner rim. Harper leaned closer, breathing in the scent of motor oil and winter that seemed to follow Declan everywhere. "Who will answer? Hopefully someone who remembers what brotherhood really means." Declan dialed carefully, each number deliberate. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. "Phoenix Automotive." The voice was gravelly, professional. "This is Declan Rowe. I need to speak to Tommy about number 47. A pause. Then, "Jesus, Dec, where the hell have you been? Hold on." Harper watched Declan's face as they waited. The careful mask he'd been wearing since she found him slipped slightly, revealing something that might have been hope. "Declan." A different voice now, warmer but still cautious. "It's really you." "Yeah, Tommy, it's me." Declan glanced at Harper. "I need to call in the marker. There's a kid here and some people are trying to take her home away. James McNeil's place. We heard he died. Sad business. His shelter's being targeted. Fake county officials. Manufactured debt. The whole package. They're moving fast." Harper heard papers rustling through the phone. Voices in the background. "How many?" "At least 2 on site. Probably more behind the scenes. They want the property cleared in 30 days. Not happening." Tommy's voice turned hard. "We'll make some calls. How many of the old crew can you reach out to?" Declan was quiet for a moment. "I've been out of touch for a while, Tommy. Trying to stay clean, you know." But this is different. Yeah, it is. James helped a lot of our people when nobody else would. Time to return the favor. Another pause. Give me 6 hours in deck. It's good to hear your voice, brother. The line went dead. Declan stared at the phone for a long moment before looking at Harper. What happens now? She asked. Now we wait, and hope that 8 years hasn't made people forget what they owe. Harper touched the medallion where it lay on the table between them. Such a small thing to carry so much weight. Were you really buried on purpose? Someone tried to kill you. Not kill, just remove me from the equation. Whoever's running this scam probably figured I'd ask too many questions. Declan's smile was grim. They weren't wrong. Outside, snow began to fall again. But lighter this time. Harper watched the flakes drift past the window and thought about phone calls traveling across the country, reaching into garages and workshops and honest jobs where former criminals had rebuilt their lives. Declan, she said quietly, thank you for making the call. He looked at her then, really looked at her, and Harper saw something in his eyes that she recognized. The same thing she'd seen in James's face the day he'd brought her to the shelter. Protection, belonging, family, even when genetics said otherwise. Thank you for digging me out of the snow, he replied. Turns out that was exactly the right place for you to be walking. Harper smiled, feeling lighter than she had in months. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but for the first time since the county men had invaded her home, she wasn't afraid of the cold. The old rotary phone in the shelter's office felt heavier than it should have when Harper lifted the receiver. Her hands shook slightly as she dialed the number Declan had shown her, etched in tiny digits along the medallion's inner rim. She'd convinced him to let her make this call. After all, she reasoned, it was her home they were trying to save. Mrs. Chen bustled around the kitchen, preparing dinner for 23 people with ingredients that had been stretching thinner each week. The familiar sounds of the shelter's evening routine provided a comforting backdrop. Children arguing over television channels, volunteers sorting donated clothes, the ancient heater cycling on with its distinctive wheeze, Riverside towing. The voice that answered was tired, but not unfriendly. Harper cleared her throat. I need to speak to someone about number 47. It's important. A pause. Who is this? My name is Harper Lynn. I found a man named Declan Rowe buried in the snow yesterday. He had a medallion with your number on it. The quality of silence changed. Harper could practically hear the person on the other end sitting up straighter. Is Declan okay? He's fine, but we need help. Someone's trying to take away our shelter using fake papers and... Hold on, kid, let me get Miguel. Harper waited, gripping the phone cord like a lifeline. Through the office window, she could see Declan pacing the front porch despite the cold, his breath visible in white puffs. He'd been agitated all afternoon, checking the windows, watching the road. This is Miguel Santos. You found Declan Rowe. Yes, sir. He told me about James McNeil. And the promise and... Slow down, mija. Tell me what's happening. Harper took a deep breath and explained about the county men, the impossible debt, the 30-day deadline. Miguel asked careful questions. What the men looked like, what kind of car they drove, what exactly the papers said. Those aren't county workers, Miguel said when she finished. Real assessors don't work in pairs, and they sure don't show up unannounced during snowstorms. You're dealing with what we call land sharks. Can you help us? James McNeil was a good man. Gave my cousin Raul a job when nobody else would even interview him. Raul's got 2 kids now, runs his own shop. Miguel's voice carried the weight of old gratitude. Yeah, kid, we can help, but I need you to listen carefully. The next 20 minutes transformed Harper's understanding of how the world really worked. Miguel explained how property scams operated, how false debts could be manufactured through forged documents and bribed officials. He told her about patterns, about other shelters and community centers that had disappeared the same way. The good news is, they're not government, Miguel said. That means they can't actually force you out. The bad news is they're probably connected to people who can make your life very difficult if you don't play along. What do we do? First, don't let anyone else into that building without seeing real identification. Second, start documenting everything. Take pictures of any papers they left. Write down descriptions of the men who came by. Third, he paused. Third, you tell Declan that 47 is active. We're coming. Harper felt her heart skip. Coming here. Not all at once. Can't have 200 ex-gang members rolling into a small town without causing panic, but yeah, we're coming, some tonight. More tomorrow, all legal, all peaceful, but his voice carried a smile. Sometimes showing up is enough. After Miguel hung up, Harper sat alone in the office, processing what she'd just set in motion. Outside, car engines hummed in the distance. Declan had stopped pacing and was staring down the mountain road with those careful gray eyes. Mrs. Chen appeared in the doorway. "Everything okay, honey? You look pale." "I think so." Harper stood, her legs slightly unsteady. "Mrs. Chen, if some visitors show up over the next few days, don't worry. They're friends of James's." Before Mrs. Chen could ask what that meant, headlights swept across the front windows. Not the black sedan this time. These were pickup trucks and work vans, vehicles that looked like they belonged to people who fix things for a living. Declan met them at the door. Harper watched through the window as he spoke to the drivers, his posture relaxing for the first time since she'd found him. These weren't strangers to him. Despite the years apart, these were men who remembered what it meant to keep promises. The first van disgorged 3 people, 2 men and a woman, all dressed in work clothes and moving with the quiet confidence of people who'd seen trouble before. They carried toolboxes and thermoses. Looking more like a construction crew than anything threatening, Miguel Santos was exactly what Harper had expected. Stocky, gray-haired, with hands scarred from honest work, and eyes that missed nothing. When Declan introduced them, Miguel studied Harper for a long moment before nodding once, as if she'd passed some invisible test. "You're the one who dug him out," Miguel said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. Good work." He turned to survey the shelter. "Now let's see what we're dealing with." Over the next hour, more vehicles arrived. Never more than 2 at a time, never making a show of their presence, but steadily transforming the shelter's parking area into something that looked like a small-town work site. Harper counted at least 15 people, all moving with purpose and organization that spoke of old habits dying hard. They spread out through the building in pairs, examining documents, checking windows and doors, asking quiet questions of residents who seemed more curious than afraid. Mrs. Chen brought out coffee and sandwiches, treating the visitors like welcome guests rather than potential threats. "What exactly are they doing?" Harper asked Declan as they watched Miguel and another man photograph the papers the county men had left behind. "Due diligence," Declan replied, "making sure we understand exactly who we're up against before we decide how to respond." He glanced down at her. "You sure about this, kid? Once we start pushing back?" "They're going to push harder." Harper thought about the dismissive way the fake county men had looked at her, like she didn't matter, about Mrs. Chen's worried expression and Mr. Rodriguez's forced smile, about all the other shelters and community centers that had quietly disappeared when nobody with enough power cared to save them. I'm sure, outside, snow continued to fall, but the building felt warmer than it had all day. Not from the heater, from the presence of people who understood that some things were worth fighting for, and that sometimes the best way to honor a debt was to pay it forward. Dawn broke gray and cold over the shelter, but Harper woke to unfamiliar sounds, engines starting, radios crackling with coordinates, voices speaking in the shorthand of people organizing complex logistics. She dressed quickly and padded downstairs to find the common room transformed into what looked like a command center. Maps covered the dining table. Laptops hummed next to stacks of legal documents. A woman with short silver hair and paint-stained fingers operated what appeared to be a mobile printer, producing copies of everything, while a man in a carpenter's vest cross-referenced information on his tablet. "Morning, Harper." Miguel looked up from a conversation with Declan and 2 other men Harper didn't recognize. "Sleep okay?" "Fine." Harper accepted a cup of hot chocolate from Mrs. Chen, who seemed to be taking the invasion of her kitchen by professional-looking strangers with remarkable calm. "What's all this?" "Background research." The silver-haired woman introduced herself as Carmen Rodriguez. No relation to Mr. Rodriguez from the shelter, she clarified, but a former paralegal who'd spent the last 3 years running a legitimate private investigation service in Denver. Those county men left quite a paper trail once you know where to look. Carmen spread out copies of the documents the fake officials had presented in daylight, with an expert's eye examining them. The fraud was obvious. Wrong letterhead fonts, fake seal impressions, case numbers that didn't exist in any database. "More interesting is what we found about the men themselves," said one of Miguel's companions, a lean man with mechanic's grease permanently embedded under his fingernails. "The silver-haired one is Victor Hardwick, used to work for a legitimate property development firm in Phoenix, until he got caught skimming from escrow accounts." "And the younger one?" Declan asked. "Marcus Webb, professional document forger, did time in Nevada for real estate fraud. The mechanic," Harper thought Miguel had called him Danny, pulled up photos on his tablet. They've been working this scam for 2 years. Small towns, rural properties, always targeting places that serve vulnerable populations. Harper studied the photos. In daylight, without the authority of fake badges and official papers, the men looked exactly like what they were. Criminals who'd learned to dress up their crimes in legal language. "How many other places?" she asked. Carmen consulted her notes. 7 that we can confirm. 2 homeless shelters, a transitional housing facility, 3 group homes, and a rural community center, combined property value around $2 million. All taken. All gone. The properties get sold to shell companies, demolished or renovated, then flipped for 5 times what the scammers paid. Carmen's voice carried professional disgust. They're good at targeting places that can't afford to fight back. Harper felt anger building in her chest. Not the hot, quick kind that made you want to hit something, but the cold, patient kind that made you want to plan. What about the real county? Can't they help? That's the beauty of the scam, Miguel explained. By the time anyone realizes the debt is fake, the property has already changed hands through what looks like legitimate legal channels. Unwinding the fraud would take years, and cost more than most of these places could ever afford. But we're not most places, Declan said quietly. Miguel smiled, the first time Harper had seen him look genuinely pleased about anything. No, we're not. Over the next hour, more vehicles arrived. Not the obvious parade Harper had half expected, but a steady trickle of people who looked like they belonged in a small mountain town. A woman in a park ranger's uniform who turned out to be Miguel's sister. 2 men in utility company coveralls who immediately began examining the building's electrical systems. A family in a minivan who set up what appeared to be a food service operation in the parking area. Each new arrival brought specific skills and knowledge. Harper watched with fascination as what had been a desperate situation 12 hours ago transformed into something that felt more like an organized resistance movement. "How many people are coming?" she asked Miguel during a brief lull. "Hard to say exactly. Word travels fast when it's about paying back a debt to James McNeil." Miguel checked his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a very long list of text messages. "Probably around 50 by tonight, maybe twice that by the weekend." 100 people, Harper's voice squeaked slightly. "Don't worry, kid. We're not planning to camp in your living room." Miguel's expression turned serious. "Most will stay in town, spread out among the hotels and rental cabins. We learned a long time ago that showing up in force is one thing. Looking like an occupation army is something else entirely." Through the window, Harper could see Mrs. Chen and Mr. Rodriguez talking with some of the newcomers, their body language relaxed and welcoming. The shelter's other residents had begun to emerge from their rooms, drawn by curiosity and the smell of whatever the family in the minivan was cooking. Carmen approached with a fresh stack of documents. "Harper, I need you to look at something. These are the real property tax records for the shelter. Can you tell me if James ever mentioned having trouble with payments?" Harper studied the papers, recognizing some of the numbers from late-night conversations she'd overheard between James and the volunteer board. "He worried about money, but he always found a way. Said the community wouldn't let the shelter fail as long as it served a real need." "That's what I thought." Carmen pointed to specific line items. "These records show the property taxes current through the end of next year. James prepaid them 6 months before he died, so the debt is completely fake. Completely, which means when Hardwick and Webb come back, and they will come back, we'll be ready for them." Harper felt a piece of the puzzle click into place. "They don't know about you, do they? The people who hired them probably told them this was just another easy target." Miguel's smile turned predatory. "That's exactly right, kid. And by the time they figure out what they're really dealing with, it'll be too late for them to back out gracefully." Outside, snow began to fall again, but Harper no longer felt the cold as a threat. The building buzzed with quiet activity, purpose, and something she'd almost forgotten. The certainty that grown-ups were handling the crisis, that she didn't have to solve everything alone. For the first time since James died, Harper Lynn felt protected. The legal research took 3 days. Harper watched from the shelter's front window as Carmen and her team transformed the building's small office into something that looked like a law library explosion. Documents spread across every surface. Laptop screens glowing with database searches, phones constantly ringing with calls to courthouse clerks in 6 different counties. Miguel's people worked with quiet efficiency that reminded Harper of documentaries about surgical teams. Everyone had a specific role. No one got in anyone else's way. And slowly, methodically, they built a case that would bury Hardwick and Webb's scams so deep it would never surface again. "Real estate fraud is like an iceberg," Carmen explained to Harper during one of their frequent briefings. What you see on the surface is just the beginning. The real crime is in the infrastructure, the network of fake companies, bribed officials, and forged documents that make the whole thing possible. Harper nodded, trying to follow along as Carmen showed her flowcharts that connected the fake county incident to a web of shell corporations spanning 4 states. Each connection had been verified through public records, cross-referenced with known associates, and documented with the kind of thoroughness that would make prosecutors weep with joy. "The beautiful thing is that they got greedy," said Danny, the mechanic-turned-forensic accountant. 7 properties in 2 years is way too fast. They left patterns everywhere. Outside, the small mountain town had quietly filled with people who didn't quite belong, but somehow fit anyway. Harper had stopped trying to count them, after she realized that some of Miguel's friends looked so much like locals that she couldn't tell who was who. A brilliant strategy, she realized, hiding in plain sight among the very community they were protecting. Mrs. Chen had embraced the situation with the pragmatism of someone who'd spent decades managing crises. The shelter's kitchen now operated like a small restaurant, feeding not just residents, but the steady stream of visitors who arrived each day with new information or specialized skills. "I haven't seen this much organization since the army, Mr. Rodriguez confided to Harper as they watched Miguel coordinate phone calls with what appeared to be contacts in the FBI's white-collar crime division. These people know what they're doing. On Thursday morning, Harper woke to find Declan sitting on the front porch, despite the freezing temperature, staring down the mountain road with an expression she'd learned to recognize as trouble brewing. "They're coming back today," he said when she joined him, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders against the cold. "How do you know?" "Because if I were running this scam, I'd give it exactly 1 week between the initial contact and the follow-up pressure. Long enough for the targets to stew about it, not long enough for them to organize effective resistance." Declan's smile was grim. "Plus, Miguel's contact at the phone company confirmed that someone's been calling the shelter's main number from a Phoenix area code every morning at exactly 9 a.m. Testing to see if we're still here." Harper checked her watch. 8:47 a.m. at exactly 9 o'clock. The phone rang. "Mrs." Chen answered with her usual cheerful greeting, listened for a moment, then covered the mouthpiece and called out, "Harper, it's for you. Someone from the county assessor's office." Harper looked at Declan, who nodded once. They'd rehearsed this. "This is Harper Lynn. Miss Lynn, this is Deputy Assessor Morrison." The voice was oily, professional, and definitely not the same person she'd spoken to before. "I'm calling to follow up on the property irregularities we discussed last week. Have you had a chance to review the documentation we provided?" "Yes, sir. We've reviewed everything very carefully." "Excellent. Then you understand the urgency of the situation. The county is prepared to work with you on a payment plan, but we'll need confirmation of your intentions by close of business today." Harper could see Miguel through the window, recording the conversation, while Carmen tracked the call on her laptop. What kind of payment plan? Well, given the substantial nature of the debt, the most practical solution would be to transfer the property to county management. That would resolve the tax irregularities immediately and ensure continued operation of your facility under proper oversight. The words were smooth, reasonable-sounding, and completely fraudulent. Harper felt a moment of admiration for the scammer's skill, before remembering that this same skill had probably destroyed 7 other communities. "I'll need to discuss this with our board of directors," Harper said carefully. "Could you provide a contact number where we can reach you directly?" A pause. "I'm afraid I'll be in meetings most of the day. Why don't I plan to visit your facility this afternoon? Say, around 2 o'clock. That would be fine." "Sir." The line went dead. Harper looked around the room at the faces watching her. Miguel, Carmen, Declan, Mrs. Chen, and a dozen others who'd become her unlikely army. 2 o'clock, she announced. "Perfect," Carmen said, closing her laptop with satisfaction. "That gives us 5 hours to set the stage." Miguel was already on his radio, calling in final preparations. "All units, this is base. The fish are coming to the net at 1400 hours. Repeat, 1400 hours. Harper felt a flutter of nerves mixed with anticipation. For days, they'd been building toward this moment, the confrontation that would either save the shelter or reveal that all their planning wasn't enough. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked Declan quietly. "Then we try something else." Declan's voice carried absolute conviction. "But Harper, look around this room. Really look." Harper did. At Miguel coordinating logistics with the calm efficiency of a natural leader. At Carmen organizing evidence with the precision of someone who'd spent years fighting exactly this kind of corruption. at Mrs. Chen preparing sandwiches for people who'd traveled hundreds of miles to help strangers, at Mr. Rodriguez teaching some of the younger visitors how to properly stack firewood, at dozens of people who'd rebuilt their lives after making terrible mistakes, now using their hard-won wisdom to protect others from becoming victims. James McNeil believed in second chances, Declan continued, not just for individuals but for whole communities. What you're seeing here, this is what happens when people decide to pay that gift forward. Outside, snow continued to fall, but Harper no longer felt cold. In a few hours, she would face down the men who'd tried to steal her home, and she wouldn't be facing them alone. The county assessor's office had no record of Deputy Assessor Morrison. Carmen confirmed this at 1:30 p.m., while making final preparations in the shelter's front room, which had been carefully arranged to look exactly as it had the week before. Mismatched furniture, children's artwork, the comfortable chaos of a place where people actually lived. The only difference was invisible. Every person in the building now carried either a recording device or a camera, and everyone knew exactly what role they were supposed to play when Hardwick and Webb arrived for what they expected to be their final victory lap. Harper sat at the homework table, actually doing homework. The normalcy felt surreal given the circumstances, but Miguel had insisted that everything appear routine. Let them think they're dealing with a scared little girl and a bunch of social workers, he'd said. The surprise will be much more effective. At 1:58 p.m., the black sedan pulled into the parking area. Harper watched through the window as Hardwick and Webb emerged, both carrying leather briefcases and wearing the confident expressions of men who'd never had this particular scam challenge before. They knocked politely and waited for Mrs. Chen to answer the door, playing their roles as concerned public officials with the skill of professional actors. Good afternoon, ma'am. Deputy Assessor Morrison and Inspector Webb. Here for our appointment with Miss Lynn. Mrs. Chen smiled warmly and invited them in, taking their coats and offering coffee with the genuine hospitality that had made her beloved in the community. Harper noticed that neither man bothered to thank her, a small detail that spoke volumes about their character. Harper, your visitors are here, Mrs. Chen called out. Harper looked up from her math homework with what she hoped was the right blend of nervousness and resignation. Hi, thank you for coming back. Hardwick, Morrison, she supposed she should call him now, settled into a chair with practiced authority. I trust you've had time to consider our proposal. Yes, sir. We talked to everyone who lives here and to the volunteers who help run the shelter. Harper closed her textbook carefully. We have some questions about the debt. Of course, it's natural to want clarification on complex legal matters. Hardwick opened his briefcase and withdrew the same forged documents. Perhaps if we review the specific violations. For the next 10 minutes, Harper asked careful questions, while Hardwick provided answers that sounded authoritative and were completely wrong. Webb occasionally chimed in with supporting details, both men clearly enjoying the performance of explaining complicated adult matters to a confused child. Harper played her part perfectly, asking innocent questions that allowed them to contradict themselves and provide specific details that Carmen's recording equipment captured with crystal clarity. So the property taxes have been unpaid for 2 years, Harper asked. That's correct. The accumulated debt, with penalties and interest, is quite substantial, and there's no way to appeal the decision. I'm afraid not. The county's authority in these matters is absolute. Hardwick leaned forward with practiced sympathy. I know this is difficult to understand, but sometimes adult decisions seem unfair to young people. The important thing is that the county is offering a solution that will allow the shelter to continue operating. Harper nodded solemnly. Under county management. Exactly. You'd still live here. But proper oversight would ensure compliance with all regulations. It was a lie wrapped in bureaucratic language, designed to sound reasonable while concealing the fact that the property would be stripped and sold within months. Harper had seen Carmen's research on their previous targets. Communities destroyed, vulnerable people scattered, properties transformed into luxury developments or commercial spaces. That sounds fair, Harper said finally. When would the transfer happen? We can complete the paperwork today, actually. Just a few signatures, and the whole matter will be resolved. Hardwick produced a contract from his briefcase. Very simple. Harper accepted the papers and pretended to read through them, buying time while Miguel's people positioned themselves throughout the building. Through the window, she could see what appeared to be routine afternoon activity. People walking dogs, checking mail, going about normal small-town business she knew better. Every person visible from the shelter was part of Miguel's network. ensuring that Hardwick and Webb would find any attempt at hasty retreat thoroughly complicated. "I have one more question," Harper said, looking up from the contract. "If the debt is real, why don't these case numbers exist in the county database?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Hardwick's expression shifted from patronizing concern to sharp attention. "I'm sorry. What did you say?" "The case numbers. We called the county assessor's office to verify the debt. They said these case numbers don't exist in any database, and that there's no Deputy Assessor Morrison working for the county." Webb started to stand. "I think there's been some misunderstanding. Sit down, Marcus." The voice came from the kitchen doorway. Carmen emerged, no longer dressed like a volunteer, but wearing a business suit that screamed federal authority. She was followed by Miguel, who somehow managed to look both relaxed and dangerous while wearing a carpenter's vest. "Marcus Webb and Victor Hardwick, you're under arrest for mail fraud, interstate wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit theft." Carmen produced credentials from the Denver District Attorney's Office. "You have the right to remain silent." Webb bolted for the front door and found it blocked by 2 men in work clothes who looked perfectly willing to help him sit back down. Hardwick, showing more experience with failed criminal enterprises, remained in his chair while Carmen continued reading rights. 7 properties, 2 years, approximately $2 million in fraudulent transfers. Carmen continued conversationally. "Plus whatever you thought you were going to steal from these people. That's looking like federal time, gentlemen." Harper stood up, still holding the forged contract. "The really sad part is that you're not even creative criminals. The same scam, the same fake documents, the same arrogant assumption that nobody would bother to fight back." Hardwick stared at her as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "You're 11 years old. I'm 11 years old, and I just helped catch 2 grown men who thought they could steal my home." Harper's voice carried no anger. "Just fact. What does that say about you?" Miguel approached with handcuffs that looked suspiciously professional for someone who claimed to run a towing service. James McNeil used to say that the strongest communities are the ones that protect their most vulnerable members. He was right about a lot of things, as Webb and Hardwick were escorted to the vehicles waiting outside, vehicles that definitely didn't belong to any law enforcement agency Harper recognized. Mrs. Chen emerged from the kitchen with a fresh pot of coffee and her usual warm smile. "Well," she said brightly, "I suppose this means we don't have to worry about losing the shelter after all." Through the window, Harper watched the investigation team loading boxes of evidence, while Miguel coordinated with what appeared to be actual federal agents. The small mountain town buzzed with activity that looked routine, but felt like celebration. "Carmen," Harper called out, "what happens to the other places they stole? Now that we have the complete network mapped out, we can start unwinding the fraudulent transfers. It'll take time, but—" Carmen smiled. "Let's just say that some communities are about to get their homes back." Harper felt something settle in her chest. Not relief, exactly, but the deeper satisfaction of knowing that the fight had been worth it. The shelter was safe, the criminals were caught, and 7 other communities would have a chance to rebuild what had been stolen from them. Outside, snow began to fall again, but for the first time in months, Harper Lynn looked forward to watching it accumulate. The FBI agents arrived the next morning in unmarked cars, dressed like insurance adjusters and carrying the kind of briefcases that suggested long, tedious interviews with everyone involved. Agent Patricia Kowalski, a woman with graying hair and the patient demeanor of someone who'd spent 20 years building white-collar crime cases, set up operations in the shelter's conference room while her partner coordinated evidence collection with Carmen's team. "Real estate fraud cases are like archaeological digs," Agent Kowalski explained to Harper during their interview. "Every document tells a story, but you have to excavate carefully to understand the full scope of the crime." Harper nodded, still processing the surreal transition from desperate victim to key witness. Outside, the shelter had returned to something approaching normal routine. Residents going about their daily activities while federal investigators photographed everything and recorded statements from volunteers who dealt with Hardwick and Webb. "The beautiful thing about your case is how thoroughly you documented everything," Agent Kowalski continued, reviewing Carmen's files. "Most victims of this type of fraud don't have the resources to fight back effectively. Having a paralegal and a forensic accountant on your side was unusual." "They're friends of James's," Harper said simply. "People he helped when they needed help." Agent Kowalski studied Harper with the kind of attention that suggested she understood exactly what hadn't been said. "These friends of James's, they have interesting skill sets for reformed gang members. They learned how to pay attention to details when details mattered for survival. Harper replied carefully. Now they use those skills for legal purposes. Of course they do. Agent Kowalski's smile suggested professional appreciation for creative truth-telling. And their help has been invaluable in building a case against a network that's been operating for years without getting caught, over the next 3 hours. Harper learned things about the investigation that made her head spin. The 7 properties Hardwick and Webb had stolen were just the visible portion of a criminal enterprise that spanned 12 states and involved dozens of people, shell companies, bribed officials, forged documents, intimidated victims, the full infrastructure of organized fraud. How many people lost their homes? Harper asked. Directly, around 300 families. Indirectly, Agent Kowalski consulted her notes. Community centers serve a lot of people. Homeless shelters, transitional housing, group homes for vulnerable populations. We're talking about thousands of people whose lives were disrupted when these places disappeared. Harper felt the weight of that number. Thousands of people like her, people who needed safe places to rebuild their lives, scattered when their refugees were stolen by men in expensive suits who talked about regulations and debt. What happens now? Now comes the hard part. Unwinding fraudulent property transfers, identifying all the stolen assets, building cases against everyone involved. Agent Kowalski closed her file. It'll take years, but we should be able to recover most of the properties and return them to legitimate community control. And Hardwick and Webb. They're looking at federal time. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy charges. They'll be guests of the federal prison system for quite a while. Harper found Miguel in the shelter's workshop, where he'd spent the morning helping Mr. Rodriguez repair the building's ancient furnace. The steady work of maintenance and improvement had continued throughout the investigation, as if everyone involved understood that the best way to celebrate victory was to build something lasting. "How are you holding up, kid?" Miguel asked, wiping grease off his hands with a rag that had seen better decades. "Good." Confused, but good. Harper settled onto a workbench, swinging her legs. "Agent Kowalski says this case is going to help catch a lot of other criminals. That's the thing about fighting back against bullies," Miguel said. "Sometimes you discover they've been picking on more people than you realized." "Miguel, why did you really come here? I mean, I know about the debt to James, but..." Harper struggled to find the right words. 100 people dropped everything to help strangers. That's not normal. Miguel was quiet for a long moment, continuing to clean his tools with the methodical care of someone who'd learned that taking care of equipment was part of taking care of yourself. "James McNeil believed that people could change," he said finally. "Not just believe it in theory, but actually trust former criminals with real responsibility. When I got out of prison, I had a record, no job skills except what I'd learned on the street, and a parole officer who thought I'd be back in custody within 6 months. Harper waited. James hired me to do maintenance work at a halfway house he helped run. Paid me fair wages, treated me like a human being, didn't constantly remind me about my past." Miguel's voice carried old gratitude. "After a year, he helped me get bonded so I could start my own business. After 2 years, he vouched for me when I applied to foster my nephew. The nephew who has his own shop now. That's him. Raul's got 2 kids, owns his house, coaches Little League." Miguel smiled. "None of that happens if James doesn't take a chance on a guy with a criminal record." Harper understood. "So when someone threatens James's shelter, they're threatening the idea that people can change, that communities can choose to help instead of just punish." Miguel met her eyes. "That's worth fighting for, kid." Through the workshop window, Harper could see the investigators packing up their equipment, while Carmen coordinated final paperwork with Agent Kowalski. The black sedans and unmarked cars were being replaced by the familiar vehicles of Miguel's people, pickup trucks and work vans returning to their regular lives, their emergency deployment complete. "Will you stay?" Harper asked. "You and the others?" "Some will. The area needs good mechanics and carpenters and electricians. Small towns always have work for people who know how to fix things." Miguel paused. "But most will go back to their regular lives. That's the point. We're not an army anymore. We're just people who remember what it's like to need help." Harper nodded, understanding more about adult choices and consequences than she had a week ago. The people who'd saved her home weren't professional heroes or community organizers. They were individuals who'd rebuilt their own lives and chose to use that hard-won stability to protect others. "Miguel, when I grow up, I want to be part of something like this. You already are, kid. You made the phone call. You took the risk. You trusted strangers to help you fight back against people who thought you were powerless. Miguel's smile was proud and warm. You're not waiting to grow up to be part of this. You're leading it. Outside, the last of the federal vehicles pulled away, leaving behind a mountain town that looked exactly the same as it had a week ago, but felt fundamentally different. Safer, stronger, more connected. Harper Lynn, 11 years old and no longer alone, watched the snow fall and planned her future. The Riverside Community Center held 200 people comfortably. Tonight it held 350, with overflow seating in the lobby and people standing along the walls. Harper had never seen so many of her neighbors in one place. Ranchers from the valley, store owners from Main Street, families from the trailer park, retirees from the senior living complex, kids from her school with parents she recognized but had never really met. At the front of the room, Mayor Davidson shuffled papers at a microphone while Sheriff Martinez conferred quietly with Agent Kowalski. The proceedings had the formal structure of municipal government meeting federal law enforcement, but the emotional energy belonged entirely to the community. Harper sat in the front row between Mrs. Chen and Declan, trying not to fidget while Carmen reviewed final details with the prosecutor who'd driven down from Denver. Behind them, Miguel and 47 of his people filled the next several rows, not in any kind of formation, just scattered among the townspeople like the neighbors they'd become. The floor recognizes Harper Lynn, Mayor Davidson announced. Harper stood on legs that felt disconnected from her body and walked to the microphone. 350 people fell silent. She could see faces she recognized. Mr. Rodriguez beaming proudly. Agent Kowalski nodding encouragement. Miguel watching with the kind of attention that felt like a safety net. Hi. Her voice echoed strangely through the speakers. I'm Harper Lynn. Most of you know that some men tried to steal our shelter last week using fake papers and made-up debt. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Harper gripped the microphone stand and continued. What you might not know is that this has happened to other communities. 7 places like ours. Homeless shelters, group homes, community centers. Places that help people who need help. The men who tried to steal from us had already stolen from others. She paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some she'd seen around town but never spoken to. Others belonged to people who'd become part of her extended family over the past week. All of them listening. I want to tell you about a man named James McNeil. He used to run the shelter before he died. James believed that everybody deserved a second chance, and that communities were strongest when they protected their most vulnerable members. Harper found Mrs. Chen's face in the crowd, saw tears on the older woman's cheeks. James helped a lot of people over the years. Ex-convicts who wanted to start over. Kids aging out of foster care. Families who'd lost their homes. He didn't just give them a place to stay. He helped them rebuild their lives. Now she looked directly at Miguel and his people. Some of those people James helped went on to help others. They became mechanics and carpenters and teachers and business owners. They raised families and coached sports teams and volunteered in their communities. They proved that people really can change. The room was completely still. When those criminals tried to steal our shelter, I found a medallion that connected me to James's network. I called for help, not knowing what would happen, and they came. 48 people dropped everything and drove here from all over the country because someone they cared about had asked them to protect strangers. Harper's voice grew stronger as she continued. These people used their skills they'd learned in hard circumstances, to investigate the fraud and gather evidence and build a legal case against the criminals. They did it without violence, without intimidation. Just by being smarter and more organized and more determined than the people trying to hurt us. She gestured toward Carmen and the federal agents. The evidence they gathered helped the FBI break up a criminal network that had been stealing from communities for years. 7 properties are being returned to their rightful owners. Dozens of criminals are facing federal charges. Thousands of people are getting their homes and community centers back. Applause began slowly, then built into something that felt like celebration and gratitude combined. But the most important thing, Harper continued when the noise died down, is what this says about who we are. When criminals thought they could steal from us because we were small and vulnerable and couldn't fight back. This entire community proved them wrong. Harper looked around the room one more time, making eye contact with as many people as she could. James McNeil believed in second chances and strong communities. This week, we proved he was right about both. She stepped away from the microphone. The applause was immediate and sustained, but what Harper noticed was the way Miguel and his people reacted. Every one of them. 48 former gang members who'd rebuilt their lives through hard work and determination stood and lowered their heads in a gesture of respect that spoke louder than any words. The room fell silent again as 300 other people rose to their feet, understanding without explanation that they were witnessing something profound, an acknowledgement, a benediction, a moment when the distance between past mistakes and present redemption collapsed into simple human recognition. Harper felt tears on her cheeks as she looked out at her community, blood relatives and chosen family, longtime neighbors and recent arrivals, people who'd made mistakes, and people who'd offered forgiveness, all standing together in a rural community center that would never again be vulnerable to men in expensive suits with forged papers. Sheriff Martinez stepped to the microphone. On behalf of Riverside County, I want to thank everyone involved in exposing this criminal network and protecting our community. The investigation will continue. But tonight, he gestured to the room full of people. Tonight, we celebrate what happens when good people decide to take care of each other. The applause this time felt like thunder, like a storm breaking over the mountains, like the sound of a community that finally understood its own strength. Harper returned to her seat between Mrs. Chen and Declan, feeling lighter than she had since James died. Around her, neighbors introduced themselves to Miguel's people, planning barbecues and offering job referrals, and generally behaving like a town that had just acquired several dozen new permanent residents. "You did good, kid," Declan said quietly. "James would be proud." Harper nodded, still processing everything that had happened. Through the community center windows, she could see snow falling on a town that looked exactly the same as it had 2 weeks ago, but felt completely different. Safer, stronger, home. Spring arrived early that year, melting the snow in torrents that turned the mountain roads into muddy streams and filled the air with the green smell of new growth. Harper stood on the shelter's rebuilt front porch, watching a dozen people transform the building's exterior with fresh paint, new shutters, and flower boxes that Mrs. Chen had insisted were absolutely essential for proper curb appeal. The reconstruction had taken 3 months. Not because the building needed 3 months of work. Miguel's people could have completed the structural repairs in a matter of weeks, but because the project had grown into something larger than anyone had originally planned. Every suggestion led to another improvement. Every improvement revealed another possibility, until what had started as basic maintenance evolved into a comprehensive renovation that transformed the shelter into something that felt permanent, established, unshakable. "Harper, you need to see this," Carmen called from inside. She'd never really left after the investigation concluded, discovering that a small mountain town offered exactly the kind of quiet life she'd been looking for after 20 years of paralegal work in Denver. Harper found Carmen in what used to be the building's small office, now expanded into a proper community resource center, complete with computers, filing systems, and a legal aid clinic that operated 2 afternoons a week. "Look," Carmen handed her a thick manila envelope with an official return address. "The last of the recovered properties is being returned to community control next week. That makes 7 for 7. Every place that was stolen is going back to the people it was stolen from." Harper opened the envelope and found photographs. Community centers and homeless shelters and group homes, all bearing the signs of recent renovation and new beginnings. Each photo included a brief note from the residents, thanking the investigation team for giving them their homes back. "They all know about you," Carmen added. "The little girl who made the phone call that brought down the whole network. You're something of a legend among people who work with vulnerable populations." Harper felt a familiar flush of embarrassment mixed with pride. Over the past months, she'd grown accustomed to being recognized in town as the kid who caught the criminals. But it still felt strange to think of herself as someone other people looked up to. Any word from Hardwick and Webb. 15 years federal time, each, plus full restitution to all victims. Carmen's satisfaction was professional and complete. They won't be stealing from anyone for a very long time. Outside, Harper could hear Miguel coordinating the hanging of a new sign above the main entrance. The James McNeil Community Shelter would officially reopen next week with a dedication ceremony that had somehow grown to include the mayors of 6 neighboring towns, a representative from the governor's office, and a reporter from the Denver Post who'd been following the story since the arrests. Harper walked through the building, marveling at changes that went far beyond fresh paint and new furniture. The kitchen had been expanded to serve 50 people instead of 25. The dormitories had been reconfigured to provide more privacy and dignity. The common areas buzzed with activities that ranged from job training programs to children's tutoring to senior citizens' game nights. But the most significant change was less visible. The shelter no longer felt like a temporary refuge for people with nowhere else to go. It felt like the heart of a community that had decided to actively take care of its own. Harper found Declan in the workshop, installing the final piece of equipment in what would soon be a full-service automotive repair bay. He'd settled permanently in Riverside, purchasing a small house 2 blocks from the shelter, and gradually building a business that served the entire mountain region. "Almost done here," he said, wiping grease from his hands with a rag that somehow never seemed to get completely clean. "You ready for the big reopening?" "I think so." Harper settled on her favorite workbench, swinging her legs the way she had that first day when everything changed. "Declan, what do you think James would say about all this?" Declan considered the question seriously, looking around the workshop that had gone from a storage room to a functioning garage where young people could learn trade skills while helping neighbors keep their cars running. "I think he'd say that this is what communities are supposed to look like, people with different backgrounds and experiences all working together to make sure nobody falls through the cracks." Declan paused. "And I think he'd be proud of you for making the phone call that started it all." Harper reached into her pocket and pulled out the medallion, the tarnished piece of metal that had connected her to James's network and changed everything. Over the months, Declan had taught her about its history and significance, but she'd never been quite ready to give it back. "I want you to have this," she said, holding it out. Declan looked at the medallion for a long moment. "Are you sure that represents something pretty important?" "I know. It represents the idea that people who've been helped should help others, that communities get stronger when they protect their most vulnerable members, that second chances work when they're backed up by real support." Harper smiled. "I don't need a medallion to remember that. I lived it." Declan accepted the medallion with the solemnity of someone receiving a sacred trust. "What will you do with it?" "Keep it until I meet someone else who needs to know that they're not alone, that there are people who remember what it's like to need help, and who are willing to provide it." Declan's voice carried the weight of promises kept and responsibilities accepted. "Then pass it along." Through the workshop window, Harper could see the last of the day's volunteers packing up their tools and supplies. Tomorrow would bring new projects: the expansion of the job training program, the construction of transitional housing units, the development of partnerships with other communities that wanted to replicate Riverside's model of proactive social support. But tonight, Harper Lynn simply wanted to sit in the workshop with the man who'd taught her that families could be chosen as well as inherited. Watching snow fall on a community that had learned to protect its own, the shelter was saved, the criminals were caught, 7 other communities had their homes returned, but more importantly, a small mountain town had discovered what it could accomplish when people decided to take care of each other. "Declan," Harper said as they prepared to close up the workshop for the night, "I've been thinking about what I want to do when I grow up." "Yeah, what's that?" "I want to help communities learn how to fight back against people who try to hurt them. Not with violence or intimidation, but with organization and determination, and the kind of legal knowledge that makes criminals sorry they picked the wrong target." Declan smiled. The kind of smile that carried approval and encouragement, and absolute confidence in her abilities. "I think that's exactly the kind of work James would want you to do." Harper nodded, feeling the certainty settle in her bones. Outside, spring continued its advance against winter, filling the mountain air with promise and possibility. The shelter that had once felt like her last refuge now felt like the launching point for everything she wanted to become. She was 11 years old. She had a home. She had a family that spanned half the country. And she had learned that sometimes the most important thing you could do was refuse to let go of what mattered. Whether that was a medallion in the snow, a promise between friends, or the radical idea that communities could choose to protect rather than abandon their most vulnerable members. The snow fell softly on Riverside, Colorado, covering a town that would never again be vulnerable to men in expensive suits with forged papers, and in the workshop of the James McNeil Community Shelter, Harper Lynn made plans for a future where she would help other communities discover their own strength. Have you ever experienced the power of community coming together to protect what matters most? Sometimes the smallest act of courage can ripple out to create extraordinary change. What would you do if you found someone buried in the snow with a mysterious medallion in their hand? Would you like another story?